In this episode, we're going to look at unit test isolation. Hi, I'm Mark Bradley and welcome to Testing All the Things, a screencast in which we use live coding to demonstrate different types of testing tools and techniques. In previous videos, we've discussed the importance of test doubles, mocks, spies, and such like. In this, we're going to go into why it's important to isolate unit tests and just how far you need to take that isolation to ensure your unit tests are passing every time and are not fragile. Let's look at the code. In this video, we're going to create a very simple person greeter implementation. The first thing we're going to do is create a function to simply greet a person. The function will pass an ID to identify the person will be retrieved, and a greeting for that person will be returned. If we create our first test, let's do simple greeting for user. Okay. At the moment, the project we've got is very simple. We have the person greeter test and person greeter, and then we have a very simple interface for the person, the name preference interface, which has one function, which is get preferred name. Now, as I said in the introduction, we also want to be able to obtain a person by their ID. So we need to create a second interface, but we're going to do this, and we're going to do this at this point. So we need to describe how we want to retrieve our person. So we will create a new interface, PHP class, and we'll call it person retriever. There we go, and it's an interface. Select interface, and OK. This up. Our person retriever interface will have one function. So that's going to be public, obviously, function. And now we need to think about how we want to name it. So let's call it find person by ID. And it takes an int, say, and put ID, and it returns a name preference object. There we go. Okay. So we now have a very simple interface that we can now use in our tests. So during this implementation, we're going to use mockery to create our test doubles. The first thing we need to do is we need to create a test double of our person retriever. So let's make that start. So we do, so let's call it just retriever to keep it nice and short, equals, and then we can do mockery. Mockery mock. Import class, and to keep it nice and short, we'll replace with an alias m. There we go. Okay, so we want to make a mock of the person retriever. There we go, class. Okay, so we now have a mock instance of our retriever. So if we do retriever should receive, there we go, and call to find person by ID. Okay, with now let's do $id, and we can do $id equals 1, 2, 3, and then when we call it, it will return a person. Now, we also now need to create a fake person. So we're kind of slowly building up our functionality of what we expect to, how we expect this to work. So we'll do a quick person equals mock, and we want to the name preference class and $person should receive a call to, and what's the get preferred name, and return Dave. Okay. I've just realised I've written all of this without actually creating any. Oh no, yeah, it's just the alignment's bad. There we go. Okay. So we've got our setup and what we expect to kind of happen. So now what we can do is we can go, so we want the greeter equals new person greeter, and we're expecting to pass in the retriever because we know that it needs to retrieve a person. Okay, and now we can do this assert equals so what do we expect? Hello Dave. When we do $greeter greet and pass in the ID. Okay. So far this is reasonably straightforward and simple and looks exactly like one of our tests in our previous test double class. So we'll go ahead and make this implementation pass. So if we save that, if we run the test and see what happens, just run all the tests. Here we go. Okay, the test failed because there is an undefined function greet. So let's let our ID fix that for us. Add method public greet. Right, now obviously if we were following really strict TDD at this point, I could make this pass by just returning the string hello Dave. But what we're going to do at this point is we're actually going to make the implementation work properly straight off the bat. So we can do this. So we can go person equals, oh, we haven't got a constructor. So if we quickly, no, we can just new constructor, go, don't need comments. Okay, and we know our constructor takes a person retriever, retriever, and let our ID initialize a property. Don't need this again. Oh, using PHP 4 for the first time here, so we can get the type hinting here, which is lovely. And this should type hint that it returns a string. Really good. Okay, so person is $this retriever find person by ID $ID. Okay, and now we'll carry on. So now we can just do very simple return hello, comma, concatenate with $person. Stop. Get preferred name. Save. And run. Our test has gone green. Really straightforward, really simple. We have created some very simple mocks that work and run very simply and straightforward. And so far that makes a lot of sense. Now, the thing I wanted to cover in this video was just how far you have to go when you're isolating your unit tests from the dependencies and the real world that sits around the unit of code you're testing. So far this demonstration shows how to isolate your unit tests and your code away from some kind of a dependency that allows you to obtain a person. That could be a database, or it could be an API, or it could be whatever. All we know is when we ask to find a person by their ID, we have a interface that will allow us to get that person back. And there's another interface that says when we've got that person, we can ask for their preferred name. And that's all straightforward. That's all pretty straightforward, normal test doubles, and very similar to what we've looked at before. However, this is where it becomes a bit interesting now. Now we want to create a second greeting function for this person greeter. But the difference now is the greeting needs to be time specific. Okay, so we will start with a new test method. So we want to do, what's this one called? Time specific morning greeting. Okay. If we take the same stuff as we did before, okay, copy that. We're going to create a new function. So if we look at this, we're going to go greet. So we'll call it time greet. Okay. And it's going to be the morning, so it should say good morning, Dave. Very straightforward. Nice and simple. Just going to do that. Obviously, our function needs to have an awareness of time. Now, we want this unit test to be able to run at any point in time and pass. So we need, obviously, to have control over time. And this is where we're talking about isolation of our test. We want to isolate our test from everything in the real world. Now we want to isolate it from time. So we want to have control over the time in our function. So an easy way to do that would be to just go, I can pass it, I'll create a new time object. $time equals new date time. And I will pass, I'll put some controls over it and I can pass it here. Time. That works for this situation. However, what that means is that whatever uses our greeter, then when you're trying to test that, then you have the same problem again. You want to have control over time again. So what you do, you maybe create a new function that again takes a new date time so that you can pass it down into the greeter and keep passing it down. And if that's the way you go with that implementation, and that problem just persists further and further up the call chain, you just have to go, well, now I need a time again, so I'll just create a time for my test. And you're going to get to the point where you need to create a time object right at the top of your call stack really early on and pass it down and pass it down and pass it down, just so this function can have a time object that's accurate. But that's not really what you want to do. That's going to make the code start to get really messy. So what should you do to allow your unit test and your class to remain neat and tidy and obtain a time that is relevant for your unit tests, but also works once your code is implemented and running in production? And that's where you want to create a new interface. What I like to do for this in my day-to-day working is have a small repository that just has this functionality inside it with a little interface that I can use. But for now, we're just going to keep everything in this one repository just to demonstrate what we're doing. We are going to create a new interface. We're also going to create a new folder, so a new directory, and we'll call this directory time. This is all time related. and we're going to create a new interface called class. So we will call it time provider. Okay, so it sits under the namespace time, and it is an interface. Okay, being really good, so we'll declare strict types. What? Apparently something wrong there. Oh, semicolon. Our interface will have a very simple single function. It's public function get current time. Okay, and it needs to return something, so it returns a date time. So that's the interface. Now what I'm going to do to show you what this looks like in the production code is I'll create the production implementation to just show you what it is. So we've got time provider, and we'll call our implementation a clock, and it's a class. And strict types on, and we are going to implement the time provider interface. And it's going to complain, so we're going to ask it to add stub methods. And now, really straightforward, so it's obviously going to provide us with the current time. We know the easiest way to do that. We just do return new date time. Just like we were looking at in our test and what we were talking about having somewhere in our call chain. Now what we've done is we've created an interface for something that can give us a instance of the current time, and we've implemented it. Obviously this is without test. We've made a very simple implementation. Just returns current date time, which gives us the exact gives us a new time object of the exact current time as we instantiate it. Okay, so that's our real world, what will be used in production. But now we've also got an interface that we can use to have complete control over obtaining time in our tests. So if we go back to our test now, our person greeter can also take a time provider. So if we do $retrieve, so we need a new thing. So time provider. So we're going to mock. Mock. And we want to mock the time provider class this time. Okay. There we go. And the time provider should receive a call to get current time. And when it does, and it will return a date, time, but rather than creating a new one, we will create it from a format. Let's put some new lines so it's easier to read. Okay, so format, if I can remember how to do date, time correctly, we'll do day, month, year, space, hours, minutes, and seconds. And now we can create our time from that for that format. So that will be the day. So we'll go for today, which is the 21st of the 03. Year is 2020. The hour we want. So this is a morning greeting. So let's set it for 9 AM. So 09. And then we want the minutes. So 0000. We have time that will be returned to us. So we can pass our time provider in. So $time provider. Okay. Now our previous implementation will also need a time provider. So if we just nab that, put this up there so that it doesn't start breaking. Time provider. There we go. Okay, let's get rid of this cipher. bar. It's a bit easier to read. Okay, so we've got good morning, Dave is what we're looking for because it's 9 a.m. in the morning. So we'll see a greeting of good morning. So if we run our tests, okay, so we'll fix the first thing. The time greet is not an option. So add the method. Okay. And again, we're going to skip the proper TDD approach ish. So what we'll do for now is we will take this, copy, and we will go good morning. That should make that pass. Okay, brilliant, and it does. Okay, so that's really simple. We've got a good morning greeting. So now we want to move on to a evening greeting. But before we do, let's have a little bit of a refactor of our test because it's getting really big and messy. So if we add a before setup method, yep, that needs to return void. Go. Okay, so we can now do. We don't quite care about the person. We do care about the retriever. So if we take all of this and copy it, okay, and put it in the setup. So the ID needs to be fixed. Let's do that as a constant. So constant ID equals 1, 2, 3. Now we can just do self ID there. Okay. There we go. And that returns a person. We've got our time provider. So we'll keep the person's name the same, and then we don't have to. But we do need to do this. Time provider and add the property. Okay, let's get rid of that. There we go. So we have a time provider, and we need our this greeter as well. Add that property. Okay. There we go. Okay, so that's a lot tidier. So we can now remove basically all of this code here and just do tidy it up so it's all nice and readable for the screen. This greeter like so, and then instead of that, just use ID, self ID. Okay, save, and we'll just run that to make sure we didn't break that test. But we have unused variable, undefined variable time provider. Where's that? Oh, yeah, I didn't fix. So this should be here. That should be this time provider. Okay, and run it. Brilliant. So that's all passing. So now we can make a big tidy up of this one. So all that goes. We don't need that time provider anymore because we're just going to set the time that gets returned on this one. Don't need that anymore. Okay, and we can just bring that down so it's readable. This, and that's now uses self ID. Just check we haven't broken anything. Okay, so our tests are not much neater now, and we're just concentrating on what we want to look at in the test. Okay, so now we're going to carry on with our implementation and look at more about the time. So we've got the specific, let's spell things correctly. Okay, so we'll create a new test. Test, what's this one? Time specific greeting afternoon. There we go. And we'll take the one above. Okay. And spell go. Okay, so we need to make it afternoon, so let's make it 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And now it should say good afternoon, Dave. Yeah, so save and run the test. And now we've got an assertion failure because we're looking for good morning and we're getting good afternoon. Okay, so we now need to start playing with our implementation. So now we need to start looking at the time a lot better. So if we do $time equals this time provider, see, we haven't even actually had to add it to our constructor, so we will do that next. Time provider, time provider, and please initialize the property. Get rid of the docs. Go. And let's tidy that up. Save. Okay, that's looking much better. Okay, so now we've got time is this time provider get current time. So as far as our test is concerned, we are getting the current time. Sorry, as far as our implementation is concerned, we're getting the current time. So now we can do something like what we can do if, or we can do what can we call it? Moment equals let's start the morning. So, and then we do something like if $time. What function we got? Hour. No. So we do format, and let's just get the hour. So that's uppercase H. So if the hour is greater than 12, we want to say $moment equals afternoon. There we go. Okay, so now we take this out and add the moment. Okay, and now if we run that test, it's passing. So that's really nice and simple, and we're kind of slowly building up the implementation of our time-based greeting. So then we could carry on and say, okay, we'll do a evening greeting as our last test. So new test method, time specific evening greeting, and we'll take that same one and we'll make it evening. So let's make it 8 o'clock. Run that. Now it should say good evening, Dave. And if we run it, okay, we're going to see an assertion failure. So we want good evening, but we're getting good afternoon. It's a very quick fix. We can do something like if, take the same thing, is greater than, or let's say evening starts at 6 o'clock. And then all we do for this one is we do the else if. And then we can make the moment for this one evening. And if we run that, our tests are all passing. Okay, so hopefully this made sense to you, just showing you how much control and how much you need to isolate yourself in your unit tests away from the real world. So not only do you need to isolate yourself away from dependencies like databases and things that provide you data, you also need to isolate yourself away from things in the real world like time. And this is the easiest way to have control of time, is to have this create some kind of time provider interface with a very simple interface of get current time, return the date time, and the implementation of the production version is very straightforward and very simple. It's just a return new date time. But it does mean if you follow this pattern, It makes it much easier to write unit tests. It allows your code to be much cleaner. It stops you having to pass things around everywhere for them to be when they're needed to be used far deep down in your code, where you might have to start creating them quite high up in your code. So that's a really kind of straightforward. So if you're combining something like this with dependency injection, at the point you need to obtain time, your dependency injection setup can give the class that requires the current time the time provider interface, and then you're at the point in your code where you need the current time, you can access it very simply, and then at the point where you need to test that code around time and have control over time, you have complete control over time, very simply and very straightforward. See you again next time. Thank you for watching this episode of Testing All the Things. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please rate and review the video and subscribe to the channel. If you did not and you have any feedback, please leave a comment in the comment section of the video or contact me on Twitter @Bradle.